Well, hello. Good evening for everyone in India, and good morning for everyone here in Brazil who's waking up to see this presentation now. My name is João Carlos Moreno de Souza. I'm a postdoc researcher in the Laboratory for Human Evolutionary Studies, which is a laboratory from the Institute of Biosciences in the University of São Paulo. It's the only laboratory of human evolution studies in Brazil and Latin America. I'm doing my postdoc research funded by FAPESP, and today I'm not going to talk specifically on my postdoc research, but I'm going to talk about previous research I made in Brazil, more specifically from my master's degree and my PhD degree, and the main results of it. So what I work mostly is on the technology of stone tools from early settlements in Brazil, and this is happening since my master's degree. And these are the main studies that led to what we are talking about, the Lithic technology, so technology of stone tools, and the cultural diversity in Eastern South America from the early times of occupation in Eastern South America. But first I need to introduce you to the context of this research. So until 10 years ago, around 10 years ago, if we talk about prehistory in Eastern South America, this is what people would show you. So in the north of Brazil, mid-northeastern to the midwest of Brazil, people would say that there was a culture called Itaparica tradition, which existed around from 14,000 years ago until 7,000 years ago. And in the south, including all Uruguay and little close parts of Paraguay and Argentina, people would say that there was another culture called Umbu tradition that existed between 13,000 years ago and just 200 years ago, and this is 200 is just after Europeans arrived here and started their colonization. For Itaparica tradition, people would say that the thing that would most define, so here is Itaparica, the thing that would define this culture is basically that in this region you cannot find arrowheads, for example, or stone points, spears for spears or for arrows or for that, you will not find here. Instead, you would find another type of tool that in Brazil we call it lesmas. So lesmas, they are kind of multifunctional scrapers. They have many retouched active edges, so it's like a prehistoric Swiss knife, you could say. It's made on just one big flake. It is made by the reduction of just one face of the tool, not both faces. And the shapes of this tool, they vary between ovate and round. And usually the thickness of this tool is never bigger than the width. For Umbu tradition, which is in the south, you will never find the lesmas. Instead, people there try to, in the 60s until the late 80s, people tried to define many cultures in that region. But in the end of the 80s, people start to call everything as Umbu, as long as there are lithic points, so arrowheads or spear points, but this region wouldn't have the same lesmas as the Itaparica tradition would have. And because people that first tried to define different cultures were failing in defining these cultures, because in those times there was a lack of methodology for studying stone tools in Brazil, then people just started to call everything Umbu. However, many authors started to see problems in these definitions of Itaparica and Umbu. So both for Umbu and for Itaparica, many authors started to criticize these definitions, mainly based on the justification that nobody has ever done systematic studies to compare these assemblages, these collections of tools, and say, oh hey, these are not the same because they present different morphological or technological aspects. Nobody has ever done that. So how could you say that everything is the same in the north and everything is the same in the south? So after a while, some studies started to happen, and these studies start to contradict those studies. So for the Umbu tradition, there was this researcher from Uruguay, Rafael Soares, and he has done technological analysis, while in Brazil, Okumura and Araújo has done several morphometric analyses. For the Itaparica region, Lourdes has done some of the few technological analyses, but his analysis in fact corroborate the Itaparica tradition. So when I say corroborate, it means that he's saying that Itaparica tradition definition actually makes sense because he compared collections of lesmas from the northeast and from the midwest, and he can see that they are very similar. However, the studies of me and some colleagues, we have found that lesmas do not appear just in this region that they assume that the Itaparica tradition exists. So this contradicts also the Itaparica tradition. So in fact, what we start to say is that these traditions, they should be considered as hypotheses and not real archaeological cultures. First, we need to test them to verify if they're real. So in northwest Uruguay, as I told you, Rafael Soares started to work in the northwest of Uruguay, and there he found out that he could identify the fell industry around 13.2 thousand years ago until 12,000 years ago. Later than that, the tigre industry appears. The tigre industry is also another definition that is from the 80s. And after that, he understands a new culture, archaeological culture that no one has ever defined before. But he identified that what he called Pei Paso industry between 11,000 and 9,000 years ago. And the main difference between these industries, they have several differences, but what is most clear to us in this difference is this, the arrowheads or the spearheads. The fell or fishtail point, the tigre point, and the Pei Paso point. So they're from different times in the same region, and they have different both morphological and technological aspects. And here's where I start to talk about my master's research and PhD research. They're not the same, but they have some continuity between them because they led to the same conclusions, the same results. My master research, I made it in the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, which is part of the University of São Paulo. And my PhD research was made in the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro. Yes, the one that was burned in 2018, unfortunately. And the museum is part of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Both a master's and PhD research were funded by government agency CAPES. So these are the main study locations of these studies. So in the state of Minas Gerais, in Lagoa Santa region. In the center of São Paulo state, we have 2 main sites that were dated and 3 that were undated until this time. Tuna site in the north of Paraná state, and in the extreme south of Brazil we have the Garibaldino site. These are the main sites studied in this research. And what this research was a technological study of all the stone tools assemblers. So not just the tools actually were studied, also the flakes and the residues of all those flaking. Not just the arrowheads and not just the lesmas, but these tools were the main tools that were studied, and many of these aspects, attributes were analyzed. The method for analysis also, I also used the replication of artifacts, so I applied experimental archaeology in this study. So first I was learning how to produce these tools in the University of Exeter, where I made part of my PhD research was there in the University of Exeter. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. And I started to make first attempts of making stone points, so arrowheads and spearheads. And these first attempts were very similar to the Brazilian ones I was trying, but this was not a systematical replication of them. And then I started to do controlled experiments. And the controlled experiments, I was using similar tools that were using in the past, like antlers of deers for making the percussion, as well as round pebbles. And also I used antlers for making pressure flaking, so just not hitting the rock, but also making pressure in the rock until the flake comes out. And all of this for replicating specifically the tools I was analyzing. So what you're seeing here now is the arrowheads from two different cultures we defined in Brazil. In this study, applying the technological method, which is trying to understand the methods and techniques in which these artifacts were produced, I analyzed a total of 501 points, 40 lasmens, and thousands of flakes. At least 30 technological attributes of each type of artifacts or lithic vestige were analyzed, with the division between qualitative and quantitative attributes. So qualitative is when you can measure in numbers, quantitative is when you measure in numbers, and qualitative is when you classify types for your analysis. And all of this was followed by statistical analysis, many types of statistics. And in sum, what this statistics is telling me after processing all the data of the technological analysis is that I have many different types of different standards for the same category. So for example, these tables that you're seeing now is just an example of 5 types of points that I could identify in this analysis. It's just an example, 5 types of points. And there you can see all the attributes from raw material to the metric attributes, so length, width, thickness, body shape, the wing shape, the stem shape of the points, the reduction technique, the retouch technique and method. And so here are the cultures that could be defined by this study. First, in the region of Lagoa Santa, we could define the Lagoa Santense industry, which is dated from 12,500 years ago until 1,000 years ago. Is more than 10,000 years of people doing the same stone tools. And in this case, the stone tools were just small flakes with little retouch, and these were all made on crystals of quartz. More than that, you can also find the oldest ground axes in the Americas in this culture. If we go to more southern in Brazil, in the state of São Paulo, this is what you're going to find, the Rio Clarense industry, which is dated between 11,000 and 7,000 years ago, where you can find lesmas. So this contradicts the Itaparica tradition, because in this region it is supposed to not exist lesmas, and you also find these types of arrowheads. So what Itaparica tradition and Umbu tradition would tell you is that these two types of tools would never appear together because they are from different cultures. And this is a site, many sites actually in São Paulo state, that you see that this is not true. You find both at the same time in the same context. So you can find lesmas, and you also can find these types of points that we call Rio Clarence points. Rio Clarence points, they have this triangular body and the stem is always ovulate, and they're made from two main types of technology. So one where you flake the pebble or the flake with trespassed reduction by percussion, and then you finish it but pressure flaking to retouch, or you do this bifacial parallel reduction by pressure flaking and you don't need much more retouch to make the final shape of the arrowhead. If you go more south to the Paraná state, you will find the tunas industry, which dated from 11,000 to 8,000 years ago. And there you can find these two main types of tools. So what you see in the top here is what we were started to call lesminas, which are little scrapers made on blades by blade technology, and you retouch these blades until they made little scrapers. They're all small. They're much more small than the lesmas, for example. And they're much more simple for making the edges active. You don't need to reduce the flake, you just retouch it. And you also find these types of arrowheads, which are very different from the Rio Clarence points. So these ones we started to call star points. They're much more smaller. They have also a triangle body, but they have a bifurcate stem. And the method, the technology for making them is also different from the Rio Clarence points. They're made for bifacial convergent reduction. So all the flakes are going to the center, to the middle of the piece. And they're all made by they're all made by pressure flaking. And you finish it with some retouch by pressure flaking until you reach the final shape. So here in the top we have the finished ones, and in the bottom we have the reworked ones. So when the body is broken for some reason, you can reshape the body just, and then you lose the original size and it gets smaller, but the stem still has the same size. And finally, in the extreme south of Brazil, in the Rio Grande do Sul state, we found the Garibaldiense industry. That's what we defined, which dated from 12,000 years until 2,000 years ago. And there we can find these four types of main tools in this industry. So here in the left, it's what we call the Garibaldiense point. This one in the bottom, middle bottom, is also the Garibaldiense point, but in this case they are also reshaped, they're reworked, but not to be used as arrowheads anymore. They're reshaped to make scrapers. In the top center you find what we call the Montenegro point. Montenegro points they are so different from all the rest. They have serrated edges, bifurcate stems, while the Garibaldiense points, they only have convex, concave, or sorry, not concave, convex, straight or bifurcated stems. And in the right, all these points, they are made from agate. It's another type of rock that the other ones are made, that are mainly basalt and silicified sandstone. These made on agate. They don't have wings or stems. They're unstemmed points. And they're much more simple. And these ones we call brochure points. So the Garibaldiense point is made on three technology types. The first one is bifacial and selective trespassed reduction by percussion, finished just by retouches to make the final form, the final shape. The second type of technology is made in the reduction all convergent, bifacial convergent, non-trespassed, so it doesn't get to the middle of the artifact, so it gets thick. and then you have just some little retouches to make the final shape. And the third type is just getting a thin flake and just make the retouch until you reach the final shape. You don't do any type of reduction in this type. The Montenegro point, you just have the flake and you make the reduction in the bifacial form by bifacial parallel reduction, by pressure flaking. And the brochure point, you don't have any type of reduction, you just retouch the flake, the tip of the flake to make the final shape of the arrowhead. So what we're with the main results of this master and PhD research is that we're seeing that Umbu tradition and Itaparica tradition doesn't actually make sense anymore. In fact, what we're seeing is that many cultures appear around the same time between 13 or 14 and 10,000 years ago in Brazil. They appear in slightly different times, but they start to disappear in very different times. So when we look to a map now on Eastern South America between 13,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago, this is what we have. This part that we call, that is used to call Itaparica tradition, we're not calling it Itaparica tradition anymore because we still lack more studies to really understand it. But what we can see is that in the most south part of it, you have the Lagoasantense culture that has no arrowhead, you have no lesmas, so this culture contradicts the existence of just the Itaparica tradition in this region. And here we have the Rio Clarense industry, which present actually both types, lesmas and arrowheads. And their arrowheads present a real standard, technological standard that is not found anywhere else in the world. And we recently we're also finding out that other parts of what was called the Itaparica tradition for the lesmas, actually these lesmas, they also start to appear in the Amazon region as well. And there you also find these arrowheads there, and all of these parts that you see, these arrows, are places that we also know that there are arrowheads there to be studied, but we are still doing this analysis today. This is actually what I'm doing in my postdoc research now. I'm analyzing these regions that were never studied before. And so you see that the region that before was called the Umbu tradition region, or coverage area, we're not talking about Umbu tradition anymore, because now you see that people there were culturally more diverse than it was expected. But still, we lack better geographical and chronological delimitation of those cultures. And this is what we're doing now in this postdoc research I'm actually running. So the main conclusion of this research, and what we're also seeing now in my postdoc research now, is that cultures in South America during its early settlement were much more diverse than previously thought. And much more needs to be done to understand it better. And this is what I'm doing now in my current research funded by FAPESP. And this is important because the understanding of the factors that led to the current cultural and biological diversity of humanity, by studying it based on substantial evidence, it's probable that prejudice, hate, and fear between distinct human groups tend to disappear, or at least more respect and tolerance may arise between people. This is the main importance of studying the cultural diversity between human groups ever since humanity appeared. So this is everything I had to present to you today, and thank you very much.